It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are live May 18th. It's Thursday, May 18th here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. I am, of course, Eric Balkman from the FFPC at FFPC on Twitter, at High Stakes, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, which is at HSFF Hour. Of course, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown as well. And I am joined by my glorious co-host this evening, Bradley Stadler, at FF Stadler, at Best Ball Fantasy on Twitter. Bradley, what a pleasure it is. We have not, and I feel like it's so weird because with the FFPC, we have been running managed FFPC leagues now for probably like a month, maybe 2 months plus. You specialize in best ball, which I think is a lot of people are drafting best ball leagues right now. And I think we're going to get into a lot of stuff tonight that you are going to help the listeners with. Why are you so passionate about best ball fantasy football?
It's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on, Eric. It's great to be back together. You were one of the first guests that Billy Muzio and I had on our Fantasy Football Fanalist podcast a couple moons ago. In fact, you were the honorary guest for our 50th episode, if I recall correctly.
Oh, so, I didn't even know that. How about
that? And so this is a great reunion in the works over the last couple of years. So I'm honored that you reached out to me and have me on. It's almost come full circle. Now I'm, co-hosting with you here. But best ball is a lot of fun. I think that one of the most fun things to do is to draft in fantasy. Mm-hmm. Like if you've been to the Fantasy Football Expo, or if you've been to Vegas, or if you've been anywhere where there's been live drafts, it's just been so much fun. And one of the things that's been really bothersome for me is managing all of the leagues. Like, I love drafting, but it's really difficult to get, I don't know how many dynasty leagues. I had to cut back on dynasty leagues because it was just too much to manage. But I still love drafting, and I still wanted to, integrate strategy into winning these leagues and drafting players and getting value. And it's just a lot of fun to draft. And then you don't have to do the management. So best ball, for those who are not familiar with this type of fantasy football, or who specialize in redraft or others, it's gained a lot of steam as of late. And the computer automatically picks your best lineup. You don't have to make lineup decisions. And I know that some people like the sweat. Some people love just, did I make that right lineup decision? But in best ball, it's also giving you a shot to take, deep cuts and take your last round stabs. And you don't have to make fab bids or have to deal with anything like waiver priority, things like that. You're just, who's the best drafter? And I think that comes through in both very small, like your 12-team best ball leagues, or there are DraftKings leagues, FFPC leagues, underdog leagues, all of those that are now hundreds of thousands of contestants. And it's pick your favorite now. Pick your size, pick your favorite. And it's a lot of fun drafting and then dissecting strategy. There are a lot of sharp people in this, the best ball streets these days. And it's a lot of fun discussing strategy, player takes and whatnot. So it's a full season. I've been drafting on FFPC for their best ball since the end of January for this next year. Yeah. So, I mean, they dropped the way too early or never too early. I think that was the official, the never too early best ball leagues. And, I've gotten some really nice values on some players that we'll be talking about a little later in the show. But Eric, thanks for having me on again. This is going to be a lot of fun going through tonight.
It's going to be a blast. And if because a lot of people are, like, as you said, they have some trepidation about drafting this early in the season. But when you're drafting for best ball teams, totally different animals. So Bradley is not only going to tell you the strategy of how you draft a 6-figure, 7-figure winning best ball tournament champion, but he's going to talk about some of the players that are going to go into it, the roster construction. This is your home for Best Ball Fantasy Football tonight. Remember, if you want to play in Best Ball Fantasy Football, we have a great tournament, a couple of great tournaments over at the FFPC right now. You can win $200,000 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament at just a $125 entry fee at myffpc.com. If that's too rich for you, we totally get it. Listen, we got a price point for everybody. There is a super flex best ball tournament going on at myffpc.com. $50,000 is the grand prize, and you can it only costs you $35 to enter that to win 50 grand. Fantastic, right? Now we won't get into a whole lot of managed league stuff tonight, but if that's your milieu, if that's what you want to play, we got that covered as well. You can win $1 million in the inaugural Fantasy Pros Championship at just a $350 entry fee over at myffpc.com. In fact, if you register in the next 13 days, by June 1st, if you register by June 1st and you draft those teams by June 15th, you're going to get a free $35 FFPC league credit to your account. You want to do that up to 3 times, you get 3 FFPC league credits. That's at myffpc.com to have a free $100 plus credit in your FFPC league account there. If you want to play FFPC fantasy football year round, definitely do that. Dynasty leagues are going off right now. We have over 1,300 FFPC Dynasty leagues. None of them have ever folded. So if you want to get into a Dynasty league from the $100 level all the way up to the $5,000 level, myffpc.com is where to go for that. If you want to get in on the FFPC main event and compete against a couple of thousand teams to try to win a $1 million grand prize, you can do that as well at myffpc.com. And I would encourage you to do that, to sign up by the end of this month, because if you're in by the end of this month and at least put your deposit down, you will have a chance to draft against the or draft in the FFPC Pros versus Joes competition, a contest. It's going to be 7 leagues. In each of those 7 leagues, it's going to be 6 pros, 6 Joes, 6 FFPC Joes that are chosen from the FFPC main event registrants. And if you win your respective league, you'll get a free entry into the 2024 FFPC main event valued at about a $2,000 prize. So, and it's free. So why wouldn't you sign up for that? That's at myffpc.com. If you want to play, if you never played in the FFPC before and you want to try it out, no problem. We have like I said, we have a price point, a budget for every single person. You can get in a best ball league, which Bradley is going to give you some tips on, for as little as $5 at myffpc.com. Bradley Stadler, the co-host tonight at FF Stadler on Twitter, from Best Bell Fantasy at Best Bell Fantasy. Our producer is Anthony Rivera. Let's get into the Dynasty rookies here, Bradley. I think that when I was drafting my rookie teams, I play in a lot of private Dynasty leagues, play in the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship for Dynasty leagues as well. I feel like in the majority of my Dynasty leagues, Tank Bigsby from Jacksonville was falling to me in a lot of them, the mid-second, the late second, sometimes the early third. And I kept drafting him. Now, I only had ETN in one of those leagues where it made sense, and it was a closed 12-team league. So obviously in those leagues, it makes sense to get your hookup, your backup, your handcuff. But from a dynasty perspective, where maybe you don't have Travis Etienne, or maybe you're drafting in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament where you don't have Travis Etienne because you're going in cold, what are your thoughts this year on Tank Bigsby from a dynasty perspective and a redraft perspective, Bradley?
We'll start with Dynasty because that's the hot thing right now in our Dynasty leagues. I'm in the middle of a bunch of these rookie drafts, and I agree with you. I've been seeing Tank Bigsby drop a little bit, and that's surprising to me. He's a day 2 running back out of Auburn, and he broke out at age 19 in the year 2020. 834 rushing yards, 138 attempts at Auburn. This is not a schlep team. This is a running back who carried the load, 5 touchdowns his first year, his freshman year, and he just carried the load the rest of the way. 3 years. He came out when he was 21 years old. And this is a player that, day 2 draft capital, but he lands on the Jaguars. And I think what is important here is the upswing of the Jaguars as a whole. You know, Doug Peterson was able to level them up, obviously, from the Urban Meyer days I even cringed just like even thinking about what he was doing to that team. But Travis Etienne, missed his first year and then was able to stay pretty much healthy. His if you consider a redshirted, first year now into his second year, Travis Etienne was able to stay relatively healthy. But it seems to me that Tank Bigsby has the build to be the perfect change of pace, and I would say, why am I blanking here? He's the handcuff. He's the clear handcuff. It is not JaMychal Hasty. It was Tank Bigsby was able to catch a lot of passes. His third year, he was able to prove that at Auburn. And so I think that Doug Peterson looks at this running back room and says, you know what, Travis Etienne is a reliable number one. We need a strong number two with upside. And I think Tank Bigsby could step right on in if Travis Etienne, gets injured again. Mm-hmm. And the reality is Etienne plays the running back position. Running backs tend to get hurt. And so if I'm playing in a dynasty league, this is a player who not only has talent, but is also placed in a good opportunity to be not just a handcuff, but an upside handcuff. Mm-hmm. And I think the last point I want to make about Tank Bigsby are the comments that came out before the combine that Doug Peterson made. He said that we want to involve more than just one running back this year. We love Travis Etienne, but we were focused on getting more running backs. And he mentioned, yes, at that time they hadn't drafted Bigsby yet, but Snoop Connor was mentioned as well. And so if you're taking like a last round, shot, in your best ball leagues on a Jaguars running back, I think Snoop Connor might be an interesting eyebrow raise, but Bigsby is the favorite right now as a day two back. And then for redraft, I don't think he holds much redraft value except for being that handcuff for 2023. And for the reasons I mentioned before, but this is a very valuable one because we like the Jaguars offense going into 2023.
We do love it. I'm a big fan of it as well. And I'll tell you, there was a time, how many years ago? It was a COVID draft. I remember this. And I had James Robinson on way too many dynasty leagues. And I remember that the Jaguars had 2 first-round picks that year. And I was on the air locally here in Northeast Wisconsin. I was on the air for our draft coverage, and we got past the Trevor Lawrence pick, okay. And I was like, okay, well, they got Lawrence. We're good. And then they had the late round pick in the first round, and I came this close to violating no less than a half dozen FCC violations on the air. When the Jaguars took Travis Etienne, I was so ticked off about it. I made a bunch of trades in my leagues, Bradley, to try to move up to make sure that I got Etienne. And now Etienne is the guy to own in that Jacksonville backfield over James Robinson. But I found myself this year, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 leagues, I drafted Tank Bigsby. And I feel like he's a guy that, and I know the joke was, his nickname is Tank, but he's not that big, and I get that. But I think he is big enough. If Etienne was to go down, he is big enough to not only assume the between the tackles roles in Jacksonville, but he can create plays in space too. And I think that's what we got to understand here from Tank Bigsby, not only from a dynasty perspective, but in the FFPC best ball tournament where you can win $200,000 as the grand prize right now. Running back 48. At the 1307. He is going behind Tyler Algier, Deontay Foreman. He's going right ahead of Jeff Wilson and Devin Singletary. You got to be all over that, right?
I mean, this is the upside handcuff that you want to be targeting, frankly. Tank Bigsby on the offense that we like, fitting the role that could be very valuable on behind a running back who has injury history. And Liz Frank, that there's studies suggest that those tend to recur a little more often than other injuries. So let's just keep that in mind with all of that. And then in the dynasty, I've drafted Tank Bigsby at the 305 in rookie drafts. Mm-hmm. So he is not super expensive. I've reached in the middle of the second round just to make sure I get him. But I think there's, rookie drafts, it's my philosophy that you're wanting to take a lot more running backs in those, especially in the seasoned long-term dynasty leagues. You want to get your running backs, and Tank Bigsby is a target everywhere this year.
I love the Tank Bigsby analysis, and maybe it's because I've drafted him so many leagues so far this year, but you're not the first person to say this. And I think we don't have the time to get into dynasty philosophy as far as rookie drafts go, but I think you're spot on with drafting these rookie running backs in your rookie drafts. It makes a lot of sense. We'll figure it out when cutdowns come in August and September, but right now this is the type of player in Bigsby that you want to be loading up on. Now, last week on this show, we had Thor Nystrom from Fantasy Pros, and I know he follows the Vikings very closely. I talked to him about the Vikings running back situation, and he is convinced that May 31st, June 1st, Dalvin Cook will no longer be a part of the Vikings. I know we've heard reports over the last week or so that the Vikings might be looking to reduce his cap number to keep him on the team. But here's what we're looking at, Bradley, here. Alexander Mattison signed a new contract with the Vikings. Ty Chandler is still on this team. And then they went out, and it wasn't an UDFA. They drafted Dwayne McBride. For the purposes of this question, let's just assume Cook is not on the Vikings anymore, and Alexander Mattison is the starter. Who would you rather have in redraft leagues? Would you rather have Ty Chandler? Would you rather have the rookie from UAB and Mel Kiper Jr. favorite, Dwayne McBride?
Oh, also Bradley Stadler favorite.
Listen, I just assume everybody knows that you love Dwayne McBride. I don't know if everybody knows Mel Kiper Jr. loved him. That's why I bring it up.
If you're unfamiliar with my work, all you need to do is go to @FFStadler on Twitter. Make sure you're following me, and then search Dwayne McBride no matter what.
I've seen that tweet several times. That tweet is out there a ton.
Dwayne McBride no matter what. Now, here's the rub, Eric. Here's the rub. I have between 30 and 40% rostership of Tykavius Chandler in Dynasty. So it just so happened that two players that I have a lot of stock in happened to rise very suddenly in the wake of this aging running back, and oft injured running back and bloated contract running back that we expect to be gone. And I do expect that Alexander Mattison is going to be the lead back if Dalvin Cook is gone. But if I don't know who I would pick, I love that it's, the possibility that it's Ty Chandler or Dwayne McBride. I love McBride. McBride was one of the highest graded PFF rushers last year out of UAB. And then he was also number one in yards after contact per attempt. And so he was just able to make, bounce off of guys and continue to get yards after that contact. So I really like that. From a macro view, though, the Vikings running game is one that I'm not like going gung-ho about targeting. Like, I'm sprinkling in Chandler. I'm sprinkling in McBride. I'm willing to draft Madison right now. I think he's going around like 80th overall. I've seen him go 70th. I've seen him go 90th over the last week or so. He's one of the biggest risers, in the last 7 days. I think I would take Madison at value. You're sprinkling these guys in, but you're not like, I'm not putting chips all in on one guy at this point in the offseason. I think that's where we're hedging because we know Minnesota is going to be pass first. Like, I have pretty aggressive projections for the attempts for Kirk Cousins this year. So I think that the Vikings are going to be, they might even rotate through. They might give 55% to Madison and then Chandler and McBride split, or maybe another free agent running back comes in. We just don't know at this point. But I'm willing to sprinkle in shots of Chandler, McBride, and Alexander Mattison all at their price points.
All right, so two-part follow-up to that. Number one, Alexander Mattison in the FFPC Best Ball tournament where you can win $200,000 at just a $125 price point at myffpc.com. Running back 30 at the 808, Bradley Stadler. He is behind Javonte Williams, behind James Cook. He is right ahead of Zach Charbonnet and Samaje Perine. Does 808, running back 30, ring true for you with Alexander Mattison?
Yeah, I think that's the right price point. Heck, once Dalvin Cook gets cut, Alexander Madison's probably going to jump to a 4th-round pick, is my guess. And so I think this is the perfect price point for us to be drafting a lot of Alexander Mattison. And that the ADP is going to sneak up because people are going to reach a little bit. They'll reach around. They'll reach 2 rounds. They think they're being sneaky. But really, like, this is the time to draft him. And even if he doesn't, let's say Dalvin Cook renegotiates his contract and he comes back. We know that he is a running back with a lot of injury history. It's not just one injury. It's not just the ACL or the other ACL that he tore. It's not just the shoulder injury. It's that he's had multiple shoulder injuries that have cost him games. He's had shoulder surgery this offseason. So there are concerns about Dalvin Cook just lasting this season. And drafting Madison at the 808, by that point, you filled most of your starting roster.
Mm-hmm.
It's also best ball. And we've seen Alexander Madison step into a full-time role and be a mid-pack running back one due to the volume.
I want to get into the final follow-up on this. And I think it's interesting because there are people watching this right now that are facing this decision in round 3, round 4, round 5 of their rookie drafts, be they at the FFPC platform or otherwise. Maybe they have Ty Chandler from last year, Bradley. Maybe they're thinking about Dwayne McBride this year. They only have one roster spot. Who is the more important backup Vikings running backs to roster? Is it McBride or is it Chandler for you?
You know, as I said, I like both players, but
right.
If you're putting my feet to the fire, let me go with the younger guy and the guy who, we know Chandler, he's 25 years old at
right.
this point. And he's not gotten much work at all. This is a new GM who stepped in and drafted McBride. Heck, McBride was being mocked in the 4th and 5th round, and for him to go in the 7th round had to have felt like a steal. One of the reasons why he fell was because he didn't test at the combine. But with a guy who's drafted with this regime, I like it. And he's an upside type of play. As I said, doesn't mean I don't like Chandler. It's just that he's 3 years older and hasn't proven anything on this roster so far.
Hashtag Bradley Stadler. Hashtag Kevin Costner. Hashtag draft day. Hashtag Dwayne McBride. Hashtag no matter what. And there you have it. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you wondering what to do with your Vikings running back situation, you have it from Bradley Stadler here tonight. Let me ask you this. For people drafting in best ball leagues, be they underdog, be they FFPC, whatever, what's the correct ratio when you are drafting, Bradley? When you're drafting wide receivers, how many rookie receivers are you mixing in with your veterans as far as trying to win not only like a closed 12-team league, but a national contest for a 6-figure grand prize as well?
Yeah, this is a good question because you have to have player takes on every player, but just because you have a singular player take, like this player has, we'll get to best ball ratings here in a little bit, but like, even if we distill it to one number, there is a range of outcomes for this player. And what is the highest range of outcomes for these particular players? And looking at rookie wide receivers over the past 3-4 years, they've been consistently producing, wide receiver 2-ish numbers collectively as a group. Like if you were to conglomerate them as one collective, like bell curve, these are undervalued players. And so, especially for the first round draft capital wide receivers who are going after pick 35. So we're talking like the Zay Flowers of the world. Last year, it was almost every single first round wide receiver was being drafted after pick 30, wide receiver 35. Jahan Dotson was going at wide receiver 65, 66. Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson were going wide receiver 45, 46. Even the reality is these first round wide receivers are going to be given not only the opportunity to be successful, but a long leash. So when we look at the wide receivers who were drafted in the first round, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then Jordan Addison, all of those players are probably undervalued for what they're offering you for the best ball team, not only because of what they offer upside wise and the opportunity and the long leash that they have. If they have like a bad first couple weeks, it's also that they spike at the right time. It's these rookie wide receivers. There is a lot of data to show. Like Josh Larkey has done a lot of work. Of a friend in the industry of the 33rd team, a friend of the podcast. I know he's been on.
He's been on here as well. Former
Yeah.
guest of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show.
He's done
Keep
a
going.
lot of work to show that there are most of the spike weeks happen in the second half of the season for these rookie, especially first round wide receivers. And so if you're in tournaments that weigh weeks 15, 16, 17, it would be extremely erroneous to not be taking and rotating through these first round wide receivers, these draft cap, heck, even early second round. So like you shouldn't have ignored Christian Watson last year at pick 34 overall. It's virtually first round, draft capital. And so as we think about the wide receivers this year, Zay Flowers is going pretty late. I don't have the ADPs pulled up exactly, but he's getting drafted around Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham and the other Baltimore wide receivers. And maybe in like redraft leagues, like you can rotate those through pretty equally. But when we get to best ball leagues, that best ball tournaments in particular, that weigh those last weeks so much more, the spike weeks just tend to happen more often in that second half or that last quarter of the season when the veterans get hurt or the rookies learn the offense better or the chemistry between the quarterback and the wide receiver build up and the reps happen. So I think that with these rookie wide receivers, you need to be heavily drafting them, the first round draft capital wide receivers in your best ball leagues. But once you start tailing into day 3, like these wide receivers day 3, there's only going to be a handful that even give you some flex level weeks. So like if you are focusing on, should I take this, like Xavier Hutchinson, like I like him as a dynasty prospect, like what he could do and staying on your taxi squads, like he'll be fine. But will he hit year 1? Like that's just not historically been a good bet. So he may develop later and may be a better prospect, but like a player like him, you're going to be waiting a couple years to see that dividends most likely. Like, could it happen? Sure, but it's not a good bet.
You mentioned Zay Flowers in this conversation. He is going as wide receiver 47 at the 10-11, so basically the halfway point of FFPC best ball tournament drafts, going behind Michael Thomas and Rashad Bateman. We're going to talk about Michael Thomas in a little bit, and I have some breaking news on my personal fantasy football portfolio standpoint on Thomas that we'll get into in the second hour. But Thomas and Bateman are going ahead of Flowers. Jamison Williams, Juju Smith-Schuster right behind Zay Flowers. That is where we're at the 10-11 turn. Are there any other rookie receivers? And feel free to throw out Flowers or take him back and say, no, you don't want to worry about him. But in best ball redraft leagues, not dynasty, JSN, Addison, Quentin Johnston. Are there any other guys we need to know about for best ball leagues this year, Bradley?
Yeah, I think 2 of them come to mind. Jaden Reed of the Packers, and you can say I'm biased. We've got the cheese glasses on, but Jaden Reed getting second round draft capital is pretty nice. It was also unexpected, and when teams do things that are unexpected and put a lot of draft capital toward a player, you not only have to raise your eyebrow, you have to say that this is a player that this team has big plans for. And Jaden Reed ran a 4.45 second round draft capital out of Michigan State. One of the knocks is that he is 23 years old, so a little bit older than what we want out of a prospect. It does lower his possibility of hitting big, but he's got the speed, and it's in an offense where it's just Christian Watson, and that's it. So I think you shouldn't be afraid of drafting Jaden Reed as well as a spike week candidate. And the other player is a deeper day 3 wide receiver that I don't think should have gone day 3. There was a mistake, I believe. Puka Nacua, the LA Rams. Yeah. I think that he's one that has a pathway to be fantasy relevant quicker than we think. The Ben Skoroneks of the world have been thrown into the Rams starting wide receiver rotation very quickly, and he's been one of the worst wide receivers in PFF's receiving grade since he's gotten into the league. I love me Ben Skoronek, Notre Dame grad, cheer, old Notre Dame, but Puka Nacua has a pathway. 6'2", 210, plays the alpha. He crushed at BYU last year. I know he's almost 23 years old as well, but one of the best PFF receiving grades that we've seen out of wide receivers in this class. And so I don't think that's something to ignore for Puka Nacua. He has a pathway. He played well in college. And when you're tied to Matthew Stafford and learning from Cooper Kupp, this could be a very valuable role. And the Rams have been searching for a solid number 2. Allen Robinson didn't work out. Van Jefferson hasn't hit. Ben Skoranek isn't the answer. I mean, Tyler Higbee will get targets, but they're out of necessity. So Puka Nacua, I think, is an eyebrow raise late round, like 18th round, 20th round wide receiver. And I don't advise taking a lot of late wide receivers in best ball, but Puka Nacua is one of those guys that I'll rotate through near the end.
So 2 follow-ups to what you just said about Reed Nacua. Let's go to Nacua first. Right now, he's wide receiver 97 in the FFPC best ball tournament. MyFFPC.com is where to draft these guys. Nacua, wide receiver 97 on average at the 1911. He's basically free. He's going at that 1920 turn. If you are drafting 10 leagues in the FFPC best ball tournament, knowing that Nacua is going as the penultimate or final pick in these leagues, how many shares of Nacua should you have if you're drafting 10 of them, Bradley?
Yeah, if we're thinking percentage-wise out of 10, I mean, 2 or 3, I think you want to rotate through. And it also depends on whether you have Matthew Stafford stacks or not. Like, we know that stacking is key. And Stafford is going really late. I don't know what the quarterback number is on FFPC off the top of my head, but in Underdog, he's quarterback 22. And I think that's undervalued. And if you've got a wide receiver extremely cheap wide receiver tied to a former MVP quarterback, a Super Bowl MVP quarterback who threw for 30 plus touchdowns, 4,800 yards, like this is a player that you can't ignore this late and is really cheap. So that's what I would say.
I can tell you Matthew Stafford, quarterback 23 in the FFPC best ball tournament at 1309. So that stack with Stafford and Nacua.
It's a cheap stack. Sign me up.
Very, very cheap. And you can get Higbee in there very cheaply. You can get Cooper Kupp, who was a guy who was going like top 2 or 3 picks last year. Cooper Kupp has fallen to wide receiver 4 at the 107. So if you want to build a Rams stack, Rams bounce back stack, that's the way to go with it. All right. We are due for a break. I don't want to get to the break yet. Let's talk about Jayden Reed here for a second. Sure. Matt Schneidman, who covers the Green Bay Packers for The Athletic, was asked in a recent mailbag article he put out, who's going to be the wide receiver 3 this year, assuming that Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs are going to be the 1 and 2. He said that it's going to come down to Reed and Toure, and he thinks because of the draft capital, it's going to be Jayden Reed. Knowing that, and knowing that we are drafting best ball teams with trying to get spike weeks in mind and trying to figure out what guys are worth which wide receiver 3s are worth it. If Schneidman is right and Reed is the number 3 receiver, do you want to be on board with him? As my co-host for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, Farrell Elliott, says, do you want to be in business with Jayden Reed as wide receiver 79 at the 17-18 turn, Bradley Salter?
Yeah, that's great price. If anything, I'm in on Reed being the wide receiver 2 by the end of this time next year. Bookmark this. He's going to be at least the wide receiver 2 bookmark it. He's going to be at least the wide receiver 2. It's not going to take more than 8 games for him to outplay Romeo Doubs. Doubs I have projected for, I've started to do projections, and Green Bay I've done, and I have Doubs at about a 15% target share. I have Jayden Reed at about 17%. So I think that, there's a pathway, there's draft capital. And look, Christian Watson was really easily able to take over in the second half of the season over Romeo Doubs. Remember last year, there was a lot of Doubs hype and people were like, oh, he's going to be the wide receiver 1 on this Aaron Rodgers team. No, he wasn't. Like we know what he is. And I think it's, of course it's the summer talk, and Samori Toure is the wide receiver. Samori Toure was drafted at age 24.
7th round.
At the 37th pick. In the 7th round. It wasn't even like 701 or 705, or maybe he was like a 6th round pick. No, he was like, there were guys off the street, undrafted free agents, who were getting more guaranteed money than Samori Toure. Okay. So I am not buying into the Samori Toure. I think it's going to be clear that the draft capital is what the Packers are going to put forth on the field by the end of week 18. And it's going to be Jayden Reed and Christian Watson.
And listen, I'm here for it. I'm interested. I've missed on Jaden Reed and all my dynasty rookie drafts so far. Doesn't mean I can't. In like the second,
I traded up in one league to get him.
Oh, really? What did you
Yeah.
get? Where did you draft him? Was it like early third, late second?
It was a 14-teamer at the 205.
205. So, okay, so that makes sense. And what did you give up to get Reed?
I think I traded up a couple spots, and I gave up to move up a few spots. I gave up Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Oh, DPJ, I love. He is a great sell. We don't have time to get into him tonight, but he is a great sell to me in dynasty leagues right now. I am all aboard that, and I have DPJ in a bunch of dynasty leagues. So any of my cohorts that are watching tonight, come to me with your DPJ offers. He is basically free. I will give him to you at a massive discount tonight. Not at a massive discount. We have paid up for him tonight. Bradley Stadler from at Best Bell Fantasy, bestbellfantasy.com, at FF Stadler on Twitter is co-hosting with me for the full 2 hours tonight. We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we have already talked about Ty Chandler, Jaden Reed. We've talked about rookie receivers. We've talked about Puka Nacua. Let's get into some of the running backs. Let's talk about what you're supposed to be doing with Derrick Henry, with Ezekiel Elliott, with Tony Pollard, with Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet in dynasty drafts, not dynasty drafts, but dynasty leagues right now. What are you supposed to be doing with them? And in best ball leagues, what do you do when dynasty or when best ball value falls to you? Take advantage, let it go to somebody else. Bradley Stadler is going to have all the answers to you on that. We're going to step out just for a couple minutes. Don't worry about that. We'll be right back before you know it. Bradley Stadler, Best Bell Fantasy, Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show only on the Better Sports Network.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
Bye weeks are so incredibly important in best ball because you can't change your lineup. You can't grab somebody off the waiver wire. You don't make changes. So you've got to be prepared. If you're taking 4 quarterbacks because you want to be sure, you got to be very methodical about the schedule, especially the bye weeks.
Yeah, that's a good point by you, because I don't, in redraft leagues and in especially in dynasty leagues, I don't give a damn about bye weeks in a dynasty league. I'm taking the talent that I need, especially if it's like a startup dynasty league, man. And so, that's created situation. Matt Deutsch's league last year, I had a glut of, it was like week 9, I seem to remember. It was the bye week of death for me. Like, it's a 2 quarterback league. I had a bunch of QBs. They were like all on the bye at the same week. It was insane. At best ball, you've got to really be strategic about that. And it's almost more important than the statistics that you might put next to the player as the bye week to let you know, no, I can't go there because I got this guy, this guy, and this guy already.
You have an opportunity to get a quarterback you want, but your first 2 have the same bye week. You just can't do that to yourself. You have to be thinking it through. I do pay attention to bye weeks in my drafts. I just do. It makes me a lot less of a struggle bus situation when it comes to Mageddon. I don't want to have 4 players. I don't want to have all my wide receivers and just be playing scrubs. I don't want to have to get rid of a player that I like, that's healthy, that's performing for me just because out of desperation.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Get all pro access to Fantasy Alarm and unlock all the features, including the fantasy football and betting content, plus the award-winning DFS playbook covering 10 different sports. Yeah, 10 different sports. I only follow like 3 or 4. Fantasy Alarm has you covered on literally everything. For a limited time, get all this for 50% off your first 6 months with promo code ALARM50. That's ALARM50 at fantasyalarm.com. Get started with a free trial today. That's promo code ALARM50 at fantasyalarm.com. I am Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Hit me up on Twitter. Connect with me there at Eric Balkman. And I am pleased as punch to be joined with tonight as my co-host, Bradley Stadler at FF Stadler on Twitter, at Best Ball Fantasy. What else can I because you're with so many different things. I mean, you got the Player Profiler, Roto Underworld. You're regularly on Tuesday nights, I think, right?
Right. Just recently announced over the last couple of weeks Player Profiler has brought me on for once a week to give some best ball advice. They have a special podcast partnership with Best Ball Fantasy. So every week, Tuesdays, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern on the Roto Underworld YouTube channel. You can check it out. There have been 2 episodes up so far. And the first one, we talked about how running backs are the riskiest asset during the off season. And so the further you are away from drafting from the start of the season, when you're drafting, you want to be minimizing that risk. So maybe take 0 RB or anchor RB.
All right. So let's get into some best ball philosophy here.
Yeah.
In your experience, going back many, many, many years, drafting in national tournaments, Bradley, have you historically been shying away from the running back position in favor of wide receivers? In favor of, if you're drafting in the FFPC tight end premium format, in favor of tight ends as well. Is that the smart play when you're drafting this early in the drafting season?
Yeah, so taking value is going to be huge, and looking at like running backs and wide receivers, like you want to take a look at how the structure is. So you mentioned earlier the FFPC has a couple different types, like they've got super flex and 1 quarterback, and so that's going to change your strategy a little bit. If you have only 2 wide receivers, or if you're drafting 3 wide receivers. And of course, the PPR is a different aspect compared to other formats or other tournaments. And so keeping in mind the pass catching upside of some of the running backs may be more valuable in those formats. So the Austin Eckler's, the Christian McCaffreys may be more value because they get more receptions, and so like I loved taking late shots a couple years ago on like the JD McKissicks of the world, who would get 50 receptions really cheaply. So that's something to consider. But when it comes to like overall value, like you're in the middle of a draft, and you just noticed that, I don't know, maybe it's Chris Godwin has fallen 14 spots, but Chris Godwin was not in your plans to be drafting. Like maybe you don't have a strong player take on Chris Godwin, or my take is that I don't think the Bucs are going to be particularly good this year. But for him to be dropping, let's say 14 spots, is more than a full round. And based on the data that we've seen, if you get to draft a player more than 12 spots ahead or behind ADP, so they drop 12 or more spots, you have an 84% edge over the rest of the tournament players who are drafting this player, because typically this player isn't going to drop. The average draft position is a really strong indicator of where a player is going to go. And I think that is also on the flip side. If you are reaching too much, you're giving up value in your drafts. And so when it comes to value-based drafting, you need to consider, just because this guy isn't my plans, or I don't have a strong player take on him, maybe that's your opportunity to sprinkle in some shares of this player at a good price.
I think that this is something I've always advocated in all my shows I've done for 10 plus years. I always say to people, get your guys. You're going to be rooting for these guys all season. Whoever you want to root for, whoever you want to that you think is going to be the fun guy to cheer for, get him on your team. However, as you just pointed out, and I don't know if you have any hard figures in front of you, Bradley, but there is something to be said for, my God, I was planning on Aaron Jones this round. I did not plan on Jahmyr Gibbs still being here. Maybe I have to skip who I want here and take the guy that is being handed to me by my other 11 competitors, because this is going to help me be a better best ball drafter.
Yeah, Hayden Winks has done a lot of amazing work in documenting all of the drafts and getting that data. And there is tremendous, irrefutable evidence to suggest that drafting a player significantly ahead of ADP, maybe once, is not going to hurt you, but multiple times, or reaching on 3 or 4 players more than a round ahead of ADP in those first 3/4 of the draft is going to significantly inhibit your ability to access league winning or tournament winning upside. It's like, we want to win the money. So why are we not trying to get players who are going to give us value? And just because you don't like a player doesn't mean that you shouldn't be taking them in that spot. I don't think there's a player that you should be 100% out on we're talking May 18th. A lot can change between now and the start of the season. In fact, it's the same distance from now to the start of the season as from now to January, right? So we're like halfway through the offseason. There's a lot of green grass to happen. So if you're drafting right now, consider just continuing to accumulate value in your drafts as you're drafting in FFPC or in other places.
I want to talk a little bit about something that I think has been, I don't know, this is more contentious for managed leagues than it is best ball, but I think best ball, it's magnified more, Bradley. And that's the fact of, back in the day when I was drafting teams to try to win national tournaments, like the big one I play in is the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, KFFSC.com. And I would talk with Dizzle, Dave Gerzak, the co-founder of the FFPC, and talked about, who are the players to target. And he said, I feel like some of these guys that have been dominating the FFPC, I feel like looking back on their drafts, all they do is they focus on the playoffs and they don't necessarily care about the regular season so much. Now, I know you got to care about the regular season to a certain extent, but there's a lot of players out there that just expect that they are good enough drafters. They're good enough analysts of talent that they're going to be able to get themselves to the playoffs. And once it gets to that championship round or that advance round, right, whether it's 15, 16, 17 or whatever, that's when the real money comes in. Why do FFPC drafters, and quite frankly, best ball drafters in general, need to be concerned when they are drafting their teams? Why do they need to be concerned about the week 16 schedule as well as the week 17 schedule?
Well, I think there are a couple avenues to attack this. First is this concept of expected value, right? When you are entering your draft, you're drafting your team, you're putting your $125 in, you're expecting to make money off of this draft, right? Mm-hmm. You're hoping that you're going to be the one who's going to win your league. So you want to put yourself in the best chance to win that money. And for the first 14 weeks or 15 weeks or however long, the regular season is for your tournament, you need to consider, okay, what is the expected value of if I just get to the playoffs? And for many tournaments, it's like, well, if you get $125 entry, you'll get $200 or $300, or you make a little bit money back, fine. But what happens if you actually do better than that? And when we get to week 16 and week 17, there are multipliers for making your money back over and over again. And so, for instance, like Underdog just dropped their BBM4, and it's a $3 million grand prize. Like out of 450,000 entrants, and that's just $25 entry. And so looking at like, what is the expected value? It's so top heavy. You have to be playing for those last 441 spots.
Right.
And there's 475,000 entrants. So you have less than a 1,000 chance that yours is the one. But if you are the one, if you just have one shot in that week 16, week 17, what's going to differentiate you when you get there? So some interesting things to think about are the studies that have been done over the last year or so about treating week 16 and week 17 like DFS slates. That who else is probably going to be there. If it took Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes to get there, then that almost everyone else who's gotten to that point has Kelce and Mahomes. So what's going to set you apart from the other teams? What's going to be the differentiator? And maybe it's that you had a different stack, for week 17, because look, it's Minnesota and Green Bay week 17, right?
Right.
It's those two. Tell yourself the narrative of what could happen. maybe A.J. Dillon gets hurt by that point in week 7. I'm not saying he will, but if you have a Green Bay stack, consider throwing like Lou Nichols in there, like the backup running back.
Central Michigan's finest. That's right.
Right. And so throwing those like extremely deep differentiating play, because almost no one's going to draft Lou Nichols, the 7th round running back for Green Bay. And maybe he's a complete flop. Maybe he's a 0 for the whole time. But that, if he hits, that's going to be the differentiator for you, even if he's just a flex play. Maybe he just falls in the end zone. Okay. And getting a guy that's different from other people in that very small final week of week 16, week 17 could be the difference between you winning $3 million and winning $1 million.
Right.
Or, $500,000 versus $100,000. There are massive escalators once you get to the highest of the high in many of these season-long tournaments. So when you're playing for week 16 and week 17, you have to keep in mind that that's the game that you're playing. That's where all the money is being made. Like, it means almost nothing. Like, this is almost embarrassing that, like, I don't know. It is kind of embarrassing that the underdog fantasy, they're like, if you make it to the playoffs, there's like a tier of players who will just get their money back. Like, you might be the second best player in your entire league, but you get eliminated round 2 and you've made $0.
Right.
Even though your team was really good. And so, like, you have to be playing for those playoff weeks and thinking, what is going to differentiate me from the competitors? Tell yourself that story, create the narrative. And part of drafting, yes, it's let the value come to you. Yes, it's stacking, but it's also what are the possible narratives of the decision trees that could lead to differentiating me from the other 440 people in this contest.
And I think that's what it's all about. And it's all about, we talked about taking advantage of value when it falls to you. We talked about, trying to create variance of how you can be the guy or the woman when it comes to be, whatever national tournament you're playing. I want to get into some running back conversation with you right now in regards to the drafting in a national or international best ball contest. I'm going to kick things off with Derrick Henry because he is being drafted in the FFPC best ball tournament as running back 7. In fact, he is going off the board as I look at it from Fantasy Mojo, fantasymojo.com, a great avenue that you need to be subscribing for if you are playing in the FFPC, the godfather of the Pros versus Joe's Challenge. FantasyMojo.com and Fantasy Mojo on Twitter. If you're playing in the FFPC,
Darren is a great resource.
Darren Armani, fantastic. I know you're buddies with him, obviously, as well. Derrick Henry going off the board as running back 7 at the 209. I know you have him rated significantly higher among your running backs. Why is he a value at the 209 as running back 7?
Yeah, I mean, we looked last year at the narratives that did not play out for Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry had 5 screws in his foot coming off of an injury that cost him a significant amount of the 2021 season. And then last year as well, we thought the offense would get a little worse. I mean, Robert Woods wasn't very good. Treylon Burks was having issues at the offseason. The Tennessee Titans offense was pretty bad. And they still, I mean, we were starting – who was it? Third string quarterbacks, week 16, week 17.
Malik Willis, absolutely.
Malik Willis and who is it? Dobbs.
Joshua Dobbs, the rocket scientist. Not a great quarterback. Great. He can launch a rocket into outer space, Bradley, but can he throw a pass in downfield on a 9 route to Treylon Burks? Maybe not so much.
So all of that being said, setting the stage for Derrick Henry, he was the number 1 running back in rate of top 5 weeks last year. 31.4% of his weeks were top 5. That was higher than Eckler at 22.7, Josh Jacobs at 22.6, and Christian McCaffrey at 20.5. This dude had twice the amount of top 5 weeks as Jamal Williams, as Nick Chubb. You add Saquon Barkley and Tony Pollard together, you still don't get the rate of top 5 weeks that Derrick Henry had. And we're talking about some of the best running backs, spike week running backs in the NFL. The only player who had a higher overall rate of making your best ball lineup was Christian McCaffrey last year compared to Derrick Henry. McCaffrey made it 89.5% of the time, but Derrick Henry 74.3. He is like his floor is almost everyone's ceiling because the offense is centered around him.
So let me interrupt you. I want to ask you about Henry here, because the prevailing narrative on Henry is, yes, this is what he did in the past, but now all this wear and tear, the age is catching up with him. The offense is not elite. Why is he still a value here for you at the 209, given the age and the offense and the workload aspects?
Well, nothing's changed really for Tennessee. Like, we didn't see a quarterback change.
But he's a year older. He's a year older, and he's got that much more touches. And we're trying to figure out when a guy – go ahead.
Yeah, I think last year he proved that he was able to keep himself healthy despite all of those things happening. And Derrick Henry has stayed healthy pretty much his whole career. And if we remember at the beginning of his career, he was a change of pace back for DeMarco Murray.
Yep.
So he was not getting the wear and tear. And I mean, yes, he is older. He's getting into his 30s, but he's also built differently. Mm-hmm. He's just built different than. And if we look at Adrian Peterson, he was able to play well into his early 30s and be an effective running back. It wasn't until Peterson started playing at age 35 that we saw him fall off significantly. So I think Derrick Henry still has one more year left in. And if we're a year too late on Derrick Henry, like, I don't see a pathway aside from injury for him to not smash at the 209.
I want to go kind of rapid fire in these last three running back questions for you. Given the draft capital, Pittsburgh Steelers running backs, Najee Harris in the FFPC best ball tournament, 309 is where he's going on average. Jaylen Warren is going at the 1401. Knowing what you have to invest in these guys, would you rather have Harris? Would you rather have Warren? Would you rather invest in both, Bradley Stadler?
Yeah, I've never been a Najee Harris believer. Maybe it's I grew up in Cleveland. First 7 years of my life were in Wisconsin, but then we moved to Cleveland and the Browns were not there. But a lot of Browns fans developed this hatred for the Steelers for me. So maybe that's the glasses I'm looking at it. Or as the Packers Super Bowl came against the Steelers and we destroyed them. But nevertheless, whatever biases I have in place, Jaylen Warren is one of my favorite later round picks. I picked him in an FFPC draft a couple months ago, but he was a guy that is clear that the Steelers trusted him to be the change of pace back. Even when Najee Harris was healthy, we knew that Najee Harris had that Liz Frank injury at the beginning of the season, still played through it, was really ineffective. But then second half of the season, the narrative is Najee Harris is healthy. Najee Harris is better. Najee Harris, the offense is clicking. Jaylen Warren had no fewer than 6 carries in each of the last 4 games. And in fact, 2 of them, he had 11 and 12 carries. So this is a player that they have trusted with touches in this new Pittsburgh offense. So if Najee Harris goes down, who we expect to be, like, the draft capital indicates that he's going to be the lead back in this offense. Like, I'm not arguing that. But if we are saying that Najee Harris is the running back you want, pivot from him and go with Jaylen Warren. Warren was able to show off some pretty interesting efficiency metrics last year. He was 11th in yards per touch, 12th in true yards per carry, 5th in juke rate, 16th in breakaway run rate, 5th in yards created per touch. And so this is a player who's extremely efficient and is almost a diamond in the rough. So I like him as a 0 RB candidate. Like, if you are going 0 RB, you're going wide receiver heavy at the beginning, maybe getting stud tight end or a stud quarterback. And Jaylen Warren is a strong candidate for you in the 12th round.
14th right now 14th, in the FFPC best ball. Let me ask you this, Bradley. If you are trying to win $200,000 in the FFPC best ball tournament, would it behoove you to go with either Harris or Warren, but not both of them?
You know, I'm not a big handcuffer in best ball. I will handcuff and redraft. but not very much in best ball. But maybe that's the differentiator. Like, I think that's worth, sprinkling in here and there. If you are a volume drafter, I think, and you want your exposure to Najee Harris, or you want your exposure to Jaylen Warren, considering sprinkling in just for diversity, having that as a possibility. But it's not something that I'm going out of my way to have the handcuff.
Right. I want to bring this up with you. You probably know this as well, being a FFPC player. Going back like 3 years now, it seemed like a lot of the high stakes players I talked to said Tony Pollard is the more effective running back in the Dallas backfield. He is the guy that should be getting the touches. He should be the guy that is the meal ticket for the Cowboys, and yet it's Elliott because of the contract or because of Jerry Jones and what have you. Well, now Elliott's a free agent, and we don't know if he's coming back to Dallas. We do know that Tony Pollard is the man there. He is running back 8, going at the 210. Knowing that Ezekiel Elliott could ostensibly come back to the Cowboys this year, how do you handle Tony Pollard at the end of the second round of FFPC best ball tournament drafts?
I'm drafting him even more. Please.
Really? Okay.
Give me all of the Tony Pollard. Back when he was as a back end third round draft pick, I was smashing. I had like almost 100% exposure, and that has worked out. And here's my justification for it. In the offense last year, Ezekiel Elliott was dealing with injuries in the first half. He came back from those injuries, got double-digit touches in week 11 against Minnesota. Tony Pollard was the running back 1 overall that week, despite Zeke getting double-digit touches. Fast forward to week 13, Indianapolis. Pollard only plays 42% of the snaps because Ezekiel Elliott is getting double-digit touches. Pollard finishes as the running back 2 overall that week. We are talking about an extremely high upside player who does not need a 60% snap share to hit elite running back 1 overall numbers in an offense that, yes, they added Brandon Cooks, but they didn't add anyone in the draft. And
they lost Schultz.
And
you'd think that Schoenmaker is going to take at least a year to try to get acclimated.
It's probably Hendershot, or it's probably someone else. It's going to be someone else, but I don't think they're going to. With the shift from the tight end, we could see even more usage out of Tony Pollard out of the backfield and receiving. I am all in on Tony Pollard. He is one of those players that I would take him as a first rounder even if he got up there. Like we are talking, Tony Pollard's been disrespected this offseason.
Right.
So I'm in on Tony Pollard. You could bring in Leonard Fournette, it would not shift me. If anything, give me more Tony Pollard.
And that's the thing too. Like you can draft him at this end of the second round. And if they bring in Elliott, if they bring in Fournette or any of these free agent running backs, if anything, Bradley, that's going to cause him to go down, which makes him more of a buy for you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All
the Pollard for Bradley Stadler, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, the last thing I want to bring up, and I'm contractually obligated to bring this up, given that I've done 5 or 6 shows on various platforms since the NFL draft. I'm going to make it 6 in a row or 7 in a row, whatever it is. Kenneth Walker, Dynasty Leagues right now. Talk about how you've adjusted your price on him in either sending him out in trades or acquiring him. And is he now a value in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament at the 406 as the 15th running back off the board, given that the Seahawks drafted Zach Charbonnet in the second round?
I've seen him fall even to the middle of the 5th round. That's the thing, is that the public is really out on Ken Walker. This is a player who 5'9", 211, 4'3", 840, second-round draft capital. I mean, yes, Zach Charbonnet also got second-round draft capital, but we have to understand why the Seahawks did this. They did this because DJ Dallas was the running back too, and they can't afford that when Ken Walker is the guy. So I've seen him fall. He's almost been impossible to trade for because the guys who are trading for are I'm trying to acquire him. The guys who are trying to trade him away want like the 102, 103 in the rookie drafts.
Okay.
And That's not going to happen. I can't acquire him. And
Right.
so I've like tried to, come back and say, okay, how about like the 108? And they're like, no, like they stand firm and that they want this value. And maybe it's sunken cost fallacy or whatever it is, but I haven't seen a lot of people in Dynasty sell low on Ken Walker. And maybe it's just the leagues that I'm playing in, but it might also be that the public best ball are more out in the immediate than the Dynasty people who invested maybe the second overall pick last year behind Breece Hall.
I think that Walker is the especially if you've seen him in the fifth too, which is crazy, but maybe not that crazy because I think the narrative on him is a guy who has been really good at running the ball, maybe not super successful catching the ball. And we saw what Zach Charbonnet was able to do in UCLA. He's very successful in catching the ball. And I think, and Bradley, you know this, every single year in fantasy football, there are certain situations and teams and roles that you have to get right. I think one of them this year definitely is going to be the Charbonnet versus Walker role that we have in Seattle. And that is something that we'll be fleshing out over the course of the summer here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. We've only scraped the surface, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to step up and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to get into the best bell, fantasy best ball rating. What goes into that? How can you be a better best ball drafter? Bradley's going to enlighten us on this. We're going to talk about T. Higgins, Michael Thomas, a guy that I just participated in a dynasty trade. I'm not going to tell you whether I acquired him or let him go until we have after the break. But we're going to get into Michael Thomas as far as dynasty and redraft goes. Christian Watson, the Packers receivers, and the Ravens receivers. Who do you want to go get? Is it Beckham? Is it Andrews? Is it Bateman? Is it Flowers? Is it somebody else? And then a sleeper wide receiver for the AFC East in Miami. Well, there might be somebody there. Bradley is going to tell us all about it. He is Bradley Stadler from Best Bell Fantasy at FF Stadler. I'm Eric Balkman on Twitter at Eric Balkman. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
What can we expect from you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Your heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
Yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Yeah! Come on! Let's go! Come on, dig it! Yeah!
Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire, over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool! The champ is here! Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush, you were doing the Instagram Live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? David The driver was awesome. He's like, we're going to win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no,
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations. And no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
Yeah!
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
10 minutes past the top of the hour here on Fantasy Football Night on the Better Sports Network. Don't forget, we got Garrett Price in the Dynasty Nerds, the Nerd Herd, coming up in just about 50 minutes here on BSN. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I know I'll be tuning in. Hopefully all of y'all will be tuning in as well. Hey, listen, before we get, I want to talk about wide receivers and best ball with our co-host tonight, guest co-host from Best Bell Fantasy, Bradley Stadler at FF Stadler on Twitter. You can register for Dynasty startup drafts right now at myffpc.com. If you want to play just as low as the $100 level, we got you covered there. If you say, I don't want to do that, I want to go something higher, we got all drafts going up to the $5,000 level at myffpc.com. We've been doing Dynasty for nearly a decade there. We have well over 1,300 leagues. Nary a one of them has ever folded. So if you want to play fantasy football for 365 days a year, myffpc.com is where to go. That's myffpc.com. So Bradley, let's talk about your Best Bell Fantasy Best Ball rating. This is something that I think is important because I know for me, who has been drafting in best ball leagues over the course of the last 10 plus years, basically, you look for the spike weeks or whatever, and that's basically it. Some people look for the consistency and just try to vault themselves up that way. But you have fine-tuned this. You have found a way to try to get people to draft optimal best ball leagues that incorporates not only that week-to-week consistency that you're looking for, but those spike weeks that are all important and then could separate you from winning a couple of $1,000 to maybe $1 million grand prize.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. The idea of this Best Bell Fantasy Best Ball rating came out of a reverse engineering. Out of reverse engineering the season-long winners. So I looked at the Underdog just last year. Underdog dropped their first tournament, like it's within the Best Ball Mania 3, where they took all of the season-long scores and just gave money to the highest scoring team. Now they've allotted $5 million to the highest scorers, whatever percentage scoring wise. So I decided I'm going to reverse engineer what is the best score. And it ended up being you needed about 150 half point PPR points to be able to get your the winning team.
Right.
You needed 150 points every week. And so you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, I know I only have a quarterback. I'm going to start a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex play. And every player brings something to the table. What is this range of outcomes for these players? And so where does Best Bell Fantasy come from? Like, the Bell stands for bell curve. Like, every player is not just one stat. It's that they have this range of outcomes and maybe their bell curve is a little, left-tailed, right-tailed, whatever it is. But every player has this range of outcomes. And it's hard to, in one number, be able to give value to that. But I tried, and I gave weighted values to the percentage that, let's say, let me pull up an example. We'll dive into one example, not going to go too crazy. But last year, Cooper Kupp was a top 5 wide receiver 28% of the time. So that 28% would be multiplied by the value, the weighted value of having a top 5 wide receivers points on your team. And maybe he scores more than the average top 5 wide receiver, but at least he's going to do that 28% of the time. So you're going to get this sum product. You're going to just add up all of these weighted values times the percentage. So the rate of top 5, the rate of top 10, the rate of top 18, I set the threshold at, and then the minimum flex score for a player in half PPR was 12.5 fantasy points. So if they're not scoring 12.5 or more fantasy points in half PPR, they're probably like, it's not a good bet that they're making your fantasy team at least in a winning way. Like they could make it, but it's probably not contributing to you being an elite team. And so I created these, like, you know, if you have your bell curve, I like chopped it up, you know, into those different portions and then gave weights based on how much these players contributed. So looking at, I don't know why my thing isn't working here, but here we go.
It happens. It's
okay.
live,
so essentially,
it's
what I
live broadcast. I get it.
Top 5 wide receiver was almost weighted the same as a top 5 running back, but you're only starting 2 running back spots. So you're obviously going to want to load up on the wide receivers because that's what's going to fill those wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and flex weeks pretty quickly. So if you're missing out on elite upside, like one of the reasons why, and we'll get to this is going to tie kind of into the next player. One of the reasons I'm out on T. Higgins is because last year he had a 0.7% top 5 rate, which, like, I have to do like percentile rank, you know, do some data math to, like, he didn't get exactly this, but if the tail curve, you know, ended up going that way, the reality is he was not spiking in the same way as other players drafted in the same spot. So like Jalen Waddle, 12.7% of the time. Devonta Smith, 9.5% of the time. Christian Watson, 11.7% of the time. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 17% of the time. Mike Evans, 9.5% of the time. That's compared to T. Higgins, 0.7. He's just not giving you the elite games because Jamar Chase is. Jamar Chase, 28.8% of the time. This guy, like Jamar Chase, was so much more likely to give you the elite top 5 weeks than T. Higgins. Now, Higgins was giving you top 10 weeks, flex weeks. Sure, that was fine, but he's being overdrafted for when you're trying to get elite upside. Like, he's a perfect, like, wide receiver 3 in your best ball leagues, but he's not being drafted there. He's being drafted in the 2nd round or maybe early 3rd.
Let me ask you this. I want to go. I want to play Would You Rather here with you in regards to T. Higgins in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. Okay, where you obviously need the spike weeks. These are all players that are going after T. Higgins. You tell me if you'd rather have T. Higgins or this guy. Bradley, T. Higgins or Chris Olave?
Chris Olave.
T. Higgins or DK Metcalf?
I'll go. See, Metcalf last year had a 0% top 5 rate.
Really? That is surprising to me. Okay.
Yeah, so I think that they should be viewed, you know, in a similar light. Like DK Metcalf, also one that is overvalued in my opinion. So yeah, I think they're in the similar tier, but for the same reason.
Let me go with a couple other guys here that are going at. These are all guys going after Higgins. T. Higgins or Amari Cooper?
Oh, I like Amari Cooper this year for sure.
T. Higgins or Deebo Samuel?
Oh, I don't like Deebo this year.
Now, let me ask you this. Why don't you like Samuel at all?
Yeah, I think the presence of Christian McCaffrey, we saw just the way that Deebo was accessing the elite weeks in previous years was because he was getting rushing plus receiving. Brandon Ayuk has developed into a bona fide, you know, solid wide receiver 1 for the 49ers. And it's just that Deebo's getting eaten at both ends when you think about it. You know, he's getting eaten on the Christian McCaffrey end. He's getting eaten on the Ayuk end. He's getting eaten on the Kittle end. And so he's just like if he's like a solid chunk, he's just getting nibbled at on every pathway. And so like, I mean, he had a bad year last year. Debo was a flex play for you. Let's see. Debo was 16.7% of the time a flex. This is behind Devontae Parker, behind Josh Reynolds, behind Greg Dortch, behind Allen Robinson. Like Debo was bad for you last year.
Let me ask you this right now, because I own Debo Samuel in a couple of dynasty leagues. Would you give up Debo Samuel right now if somebody offered you an early 2024 rookie pick? I beg your pardon, an early second round 2024 dynasty.
No, I still hold on to Debo.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I still hold on to Debo for that.
Okay. All right. Getting back to my original question. Debo's, beg your pardon, T. Higgins or Keenan Allen?
Ooh, I like Keenan Allen this year. And I think that Keenan Allen is one of those, he may not have like the, where is Keenan here? Let me pull him up.
And I think, and like while you pull him up, I'll say this because there's a lot of people saying, why would you like Keenan Allen? They drafted Quentin Johnston. They have Joshua Palmer, who showed out in games last year when either Williams or Allen was hurt. Allen is the type of guy that they could part with after this season, and quite frankly, thought about parting with this past off season. Why do you like Keenan Allen better than T. Higgins for best ball leagues this year?
Yeah, we think that they're going to pass more. We already know they pass a lot. The addition of Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator is the up and up. I think that's going to be a missing piece for them. I think Quentin Johnston is an extra speed guy who's going to spread the defense a little bit more. Keenan Allen, when it comes to data, last year 4.6% of his weeks were top 5, and that's dealing with the injuries that he dealt with. But here's the rub. He was top 10 in flex. He was the top 10 wide receiver in rate of making your best ball lineup as a flex. So even if he wasn't getting, the 20% or 15% top 5 rates, he was still being a consistent play for you. And where Keenan Allen is going, I think he's going, round 4, round 5, somewhere
Keenan
around
Allen
there.
right now, wide receiver 18 at the 409 in FFPC.
Yeah, so I think that's like you're paying early 3rd round for T. Higgins, or you could get Keenan Allen, a round and a half later. I think that's the arbitrage.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not going to tell you where Calvin Ridley's going, but if you had the opportunity, T. Higgins or Calvin Ridley this year, and after you give me your answer, I'm going to tell you where Ridley's going in the FFPC best ball tournament. T.
Higgins or Calvin Ridley?
Yep.
Oh, give me Calvin Ridley. And this might be an unpopular take. I've seen a lot of smart people in the industry, people that I respect, say Christian Kirk is going to be the number 1. I just have not seen that supported in the data. Calvin Ridley has an 11.5% career top 5 rate and a 15.2% top 5 rate over the last 3 seasons. And yes, like he missed last year, he's missed a year and a half, but he has always consistently gotten 25% plus target shares. Christian Kirk just can't sniff that. And so if you drop a big rock like that into an offense, they're going to use Calvin Ridley. He's going to be the lead target getter in this ascending Jaguars offense. I'm in on Calvin Ridley this year.
And why should people, because you just cited the stats of what he's done over the course of his career, why do you think drafters are overrating the fact that this dude did not play football last year? Why should we be moving past that in drafts?
Well, we've seen like other wide receivers take breaks or have things happen in their lives. Antonio Brown, for instance, obviously very different situations. But Ridley is a younger player. Remember, he's 1st round draft capital, so he has the pedigree, and he played well with and coexisted with Julio Jones. Like that was still prime Julio years for Calvin Ridley. Mm-hmm. And if we were to take his last 3 years in the top 5 rate and compare them, he's ahead of DK Metcalf. He is ahead of Deebo Samuel. He's ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's in the same range as A.J. Brown over the last 3 years of the games of accessing elite upside. And so you put Trevor Lawrence, who is a sleeper MVP candidate. I don't know what the betting odds are.
I'll find out.
To be MVP, but whatever they are right now, I'm interested in sprinkling a little bit on Trevor Lawrence as MVP for 2023.
I'm going to look it up right now as far as what we're looking at here for Trevor Lawrence, and we might have to take a break, and I'll find out. But don't you worry. Okay, so the last thing I want to bring up here, or no, maybe a couple more things I want to bring up. Yeah, let's bring up a couple more things. I traded in a dynasty league today, literally a couple hours before I went on the air tonight. I traded a 2024 third rookie draft pick for Michael Thomas in a league where Michael Thomas might be my third or fourth receiver this year. And let's face it, if he's my third or fourth receiver this year, I need the help. Third round rookie pick does not mean a whole lot to me. He is going to be going, or he's currently going, Bradley, as the wide receiver 45 at the 10:05 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. How much of a draft value is Michael Thomas, not only in the mid-10th round of a redraft league, but giving up a, let's just call it a mid-third round rookie draft pick in dynasty leagues?
Oh, it's an absolute smash. Michael Thomas. This is the Antonio Brown corollary. Good receivers stay good for a long time, especially if they are not the big-bodied prototype wide receivers. The Calvin Johnsons of the world, are just so big that they take so many hits and, get hurt. But no, he is of the same likeness as Antonio Brown, and I like that he's going to play into his early 30s. I don't care. Yes, but the injury discount is built in, Eric. That's the deal, is you're getting access to a player who can get top 10 weeks. Last year, Michael Thomas only played 3 games, but he was wide receiver 8 for me in my best Bell value rating, because not only did he have a high floor, but he also had a ceiling game in there. And then if we look over the last 3 years, he's still wide receiver 24, despite all the things that have been happening. This is a player who can access elite upside, and you're probably not going to get that in round 3 of your dynasty drafts. Mm-hmm. So for him to be going in round 10, I think that's a fine spot, especially if you go heavy running back. If you're banking, if you need to take a swing on a mid to late round wide receiver, Michael Thomas he fits the profile of a high target wide receiver for a quarterback who's been pretty accurate in his career in Derek Carr. And I think Chris Olave will work just fine with Michael Thomas. I'm not worried about that target competition because, you look at Juwan Johnson and Taysom Hill and now Foster Moreau, they're all going to cannibalize each other. There's not a wide receiver 3 of significance on this team. So I think that Olave and Thomas are going to be just fine, and getting the discount on Thomas is perfect, especially if you're a win now team in Dynasty.
In regards to Trevor Lawrence over at DraftKings Sportsbook, Trevor Lawrence is a plus 1,400 to win the NFL MVP. Only 6 players are in front of him there. Over at FanDuel, Trevor Lawrence is plus 1,600.
Who's ahead of him, Eric?
NFL. I will tell you right now. At FanDuel, Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes all at plus 700. Justin Herbert plus 900. Jalen Hurts at 1,200. And then Lamar Jackson at plus 1,500. Ironically enough, at FanDuel, Aaron Rodgers is getting the same MVP odds as Trevor Lawrence. Over at DraftKings, Patrick Mahomes is the favorite, plus 700. Joe Burrow, plus 750. Josh Allen, plus 800. Jalen Hurts, plus 900. Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert, both at 1,200. And then Lawrence, Fields, and Aaron Rodgers, all at plus 1,400. Don't forget, at FanDuel, up to $1,000 on a no-sweat first bet by using fantasyalarm.com/FanDuel. You can join FanDuel Sportsbook. Deposit $10 or more. Place your first bet up to $1,000. Get up to $1,000 in bonus bets if you lose. And of course, over at DraftKings, bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets instantly. FantasyAlarm.com/DraftKings is where you want to go for that. What do you think of those Trevor Lawrence MVP bets?
I think I'm going to maybe sprinkle in a little bit here, Eric.
That's the thing. And not only can you do it at FanDuel or DraftKings, $1,000 paid back in bonus bets if you don't win by using FantasyAlarm.com/BetMGM. Caesars, up to $1,250 back on your first bet, plus 1,000 tier credits and 1,000 reward credits using promo code FULLFA, FULLFA, FantasyAlarm.com/Caesars. I'm kind of with you on the Trevor Lawrence thing. Let's get back into it as far as the fantasy football aspect of the show goes. And I know, we're okay. We have to get into some Packers stuff here.
We do. We look at the pack. I got a Tanya jersey. I know.
I said, and Lazard. You have Lazard back there too.
Oh, and if I can tilt the camera up just a little bit, we got Bakhtiari.
Oh, Bakhtiari. Okay, all right, perfect. Yes, obviously David Bakhtiari. Going on. You are a massive, massive Packers fan. All right, so let's get into this. We'll scrape the surface right now. If we get a chance to do it more so before the top of the hour, we will. Given the change at quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, how do you feel about Christian Watson going at the 509, wide receiver 23 in the FFPC best ball tournament right now?
I think mid-fifth round is perfectly acceptable. I think he's going, around wide receiver 22, 24, somewhere around
23,
there.
23.
Yep, 23. So I was very close. But Christian Watson was wide receiver 20 last year for me in his best bell value rank. And just for those who are tuning in, that combines and weights ceiling more than floor and doesn't count any games that they didn't meet at their flex. So it really does give the best ball feel, because if they're not meeting their flex, they're not helping your lineup. So we want to know how much he helped your lineup. And he was wide receiver 20 last year. He dealt with injuries and inconsistency in the beginning of the season, but he finished as wide receiver 12 in yards per route run last year. And that sounds pretty good, but it could have been even better if he hadn't dropped a 75-yard touchdown on the opening drive throw from Aaron Rodgers against the Minnesota Vikings. He would have, in fact, increased his yards per route run to nearly identical that of Justin Jefferson. So I'm not saying Christian Watson is Justin Jefferson, but what I am saying is he offers this spike week potential and is better in best ball than he is in redraft, because we also know that there are issues or potential issues with Jordan Love. Like, Love has not consistently shown in his backup role that he can deliver the ball consistently to where it needs to be. He was quarterback 9 in PFF passer grade last year. This is Jordan Love, but he only had 21 dropbacks. It's just too small of a sample size for us to say we have confidence in Jordan Love. And the Packers have not shown that same confidence either by halvesing this extension. They did not extend the 5th-year option. They said, we'll meet you halfway. We won't decline it because we have to show some level of confidence. We can't just trade away a back-to-back MVP winner after we drafted you. To just decline your 5th-year option. We have to do something. So Jordan Love is going to have a long enough leash, and he's going to have to lean on Christian Watson and Jaden Reed this year. So,
this is, and like Bradley, I bring this up on the show seemingly every week. I have a local sports talk radio show in Northeast Wisconsin. Anybody who calls in to my show and says Jordan Love is the second coming of Favre, he's the second coming of Rodgers, or this is the biggest bust since Anthony Dilwig or whatever, I always say, how do you know? Nobody knows. We don't know. Like, I've drafted Jordan Love in a couple of redraft leagues. Maybe he's awesome. Maybe he's just good. Maybe he's average. Maybe he completely sucks. I have nothing to go on this. The only games we have seen Jordan Love play, a couple of games against Detroit when he was throwing to backups and having backups block for him. The Philadelphia Eagles when we heard that Darius Slay said the Eagles were coming after him hard and blitzing him, and he carved him up. And then Jordan Love saying later on, no, they were sitting back. It was easy. I was just picking them clean. And then the Kansas City Chiefs game where he played Patrick Mahomes. You had 30-mile-an-hour crosswinds that game, and Jordan Love's quarterback rating was 5 points below Mr. All-World Patrick Mahomes. Both those guys sucked that game. I have nothing to go on. I don't know if he's going to be good or not. I'm beating the horse to death here, and I apologize to all the viewers who have seen me go off on this before. He could be good, and people ask me all the time because I cover the Packers. Like, I don't know. He could be really good. He could totally suck. And as you said on Twitter, maybe the Packers are in the running for trading up for Caleb Williams next year.
I mean, they're darkest candidate, frankly. Like, if Love stinks, the Packers have Sean Clifford that they drafted.
Right.
Like, they don't have like a Gardner Minshew to like back them up. They're saying Love is going to take us to the playoffs, or we need to be drafting in the top 3 next year.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I want to rapid fire on these last 2 things. So the Baltimore Ravens receivers, Bradley. Right now, Rashad Bateman, wide receiver 46 at the 10:06. Odell Beckham, wide receiver 51 at the 11:08, and Zay Flowers 10:11 at the wide receiver 47. They're all going between wide receiver 47 and wide receiver 51. Is there one of these guys that stands out to you for best ball leagues, or are you avoiding the situation completely?
You know, I'm just rotating through these players. I'm not sure who's going to hit. If I have a bet of who's going to be the number 1 target earner, it's probably going to be Odell Beckham.
Oh,
I think it's going to be Odell Beckham. He's historically just drawn the targets, and they paid him a ton of money to be this lead wide receiver. I think Odell Beckham is probably the best bet. It doesn't make him the right bet, but I'm rotating through all of these wide receivers because maybe it's Zay Flowers, especially in your best ball tournaments, who we talked about this at the top of the show. These first round wide receivers spike in the second half of the season. So if you're focusing on tournament leagues, consider Zay Flowers a little bit more heavily. And then Rashad Bateman, I mean, I'm rotating through. I do believe in the talent of Bateman, but the signing of Odell Beckham is kind of an indictment of what we hoped Rashad Bateman would be.
The last thing I want to get to here, and I'll let you weigh in on this. I'll let you fight for him. Braxton Berrios in Miami. He is not being drafted on average in the FFPC best ball tournament. 20 rounds, 12 teams, not being drafted at all. Why do people need to be cognizant of him? Why do people need to be looking at him in the 19th, the 20th round as a potential guy that can help them get to that $200,000 grand prize?
Sure. So let me set the stage here. Tua Tagovailoa hit a lot of spike weeks when he was healthy. Well, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, that fits. Mike Gesicki out of the slot leaves. They don't really bring in anyone else. Cedric Wilson was not the player that they had hoped to fill in. They went out. They spent money on Braxton Berrios, interdivisional signing. So they have a lot of film, the Dolphins do, on Braxton Berrios, and they've seen since 2020. Let me just go through the target rates real quick. Braxton Berrios, 31.6% target rate. That was number 2 among all wide receivers in 2020. In 2021, 27.1. That was 19th among all wide receivers. And last year was even still 19%, despite not getting a lot of room in the New York Jets offense. And so I think this is a player who's brought in by this regime, has a pathway to opportunity, has drawn targets in the past. And if he's being undrafted, think if Waddle or Hill goes down, who's the next man up? Braxton Berrios could be a very sneaky late round pick. And we've seen in the past, like in 2020, games of 15 points, 16 points, 17 points. You can look back in these game logs and see, like, week 17 of 2021, when all the money is being made, 25.7 fantasy points for Braxton Berrios. This is a guy who has scored fantasy points in the past when he's been given opportunity. So if he's given opportunity in Miami, which there is a pathway for, you should be drafting him everywhere, especially if you have Tua stacks.
Tua stacks would make sense for Braxton Berrios for sure. And the fact that you can get him for free in the 2022 FFPC Best Ball Tournament makes all the sense in the world. You know who else is making all the sense in the world tonight? It's at FF Stadler from at Best Ball Fantasy. Right now, Bradley Stadler on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show here on the Better Sports Network. We have not touched the tight ends. Travis Kelce, Trey McBride. Let's talk about those guys, as well as Cole Kmet, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, and much more. We only have a little bit of time left, but we got a lot of information for you here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Eric Balkman from the FFPC, Bradley Stadler from Best Bell Fantasy. We'll be right back.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
Anybody who's watching this, getting ready for the rookie draft, so let's do an all-out blitz on this. Should you be drafting for need or should you be drafting for talent? And I'll give you an example. Oftentimes, I have pretty good receivers. My receiver core is usually really good for my dynasty teams. My running back core, usually not so bueno. I don't know if I just focus on receivers and tight ends too much, but my running backs, I usually need players here. If I am sitting at like the 103, the 104, the 105, should I be, reaching on a guy like Zach Charbonnet? Or should I be looking at drafting guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba or Dalton Kincaid or Jordan Addison, stuff like that? How do you handle weighing drafting for need versus talent for rookie drafts, Pat?
Generally, I think it makes sense to go with the talent and, like talent over need. And I do think, best ball drafts are a little differently because you can't make moves in season. But in managed leagues, whether it's redraft or dynasty, I think positional balance is like the most overrated thing in fantasy. You can make trades, go with the talent, go with the value on the draft board, and worry about positional balance later on.
However you're invested in sports, from betting to fantasy, collectibles, and more, join our community on Better Sports Network.
Attention, Bettor fans. You can have the Better Sports Network newsletter emailed to you every single day. The only place to get our daily Better Bet, exclusive offers, program alerts, special events, and, of course, our top moments. Register for free at bettersports.com. That's bettersports.com. I am speaking with Bradley Stadler at FF Stadler. Of course, you follow him on Twitter as well at Best Bell Fantasy. BestBellFantasy.com is where to get all the juicy nuggets and more that we have been talking about on the program tonight. I want to shift into tight end, specifically Dynasty, for this first question. I am a bag holder, Bradley. I'm going to tell you that right now. Whether it be Hines Ward is like that's my crowning achievement. Everybody told me to sell high on that guy. I don't know how many years ago. I held on to him, and I got like 5 great years. Great, not good years out of him. And I think Travis Kelce, for the leagues I have him in Dynasty as well, I'm doing the same thing. There were people telling you 3-4 years ago saying that now is the time to sell on Travis Kelce before he turns 29, before he turns 30. And obviously the people who did that, probably not super happy with it. Now he's coming up on his, age 34 season. Is now the correct time to sell on Travis Kelce? Or Bradley, is this a guy that you still need to be holding on to?
If you got Travis Kelce on your dynasty team, you're there to win your dynasty league, and you're going to probably keep him there. The reality is these tight ends that are elite stick around for a long time, even past their prime, and still contribute to your fantasy team. We're talking Jason Witten, still getting top 12 at age 37. Jimmy Graham being the touchdown dependent high-end tight end too at age 34, 35. Greg Olsen, right? These are tight ends.
Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates, a couple other things to back up your point.
Here's the thing. Tony Gonzalez was a top 6 tight end in fantasy points per game at age 36. He wasn't the elite of elite, but he was still
top 6 is awesome.
He was still a usable tight end, a starting tight end for your fantasy teams at age 36. So I don't think you sell unless you get a pretty nice pick. Some people have asked me on Twitter how much, and I said you need like a 105, 106 plus, a Trey McBride or a David Njoku to make that type of thing happen. You need an elite asset back and a starting tight end back if you want to sell. And I don't think you should, but because your team is probably designed to be winning now.
Let me ask you about another tight end. Well, we keep talking about, Laporta and Mayer and Kincaid and Musgrave and Kraft and all these guys. Schoenmaker is another one too. But we don't talk a whole lot about the second-year tight ends. Let me ask you a little bit about a guy that was widely heralded FFPC drafts last year as a guy to go with as your top tight end, and that's Trey McBride. Currently, in FFPC startup drafts, Bradley, tight end 18 at the 11-12. This is a 20-round draft. Trey McBride, is this guy that, given his price, what FFPC drafters are selecting him at in startup drafts, is this a price that you want to be striking at to try to acquire him?
The reality is Trey McBride is more a Arizona stack type of tight end. He's not one I'm going out of my way to draft. Like if I have Kyler Murray, I also know that Kyler Murray is probably going to miss a couple games. So like you're handicapping yourself there. And even when McBride took over for Zach Ertz last year, we only saw one game where he finished as inside the top 15 of tight ends. So there's concern with McBride that he's not going to be a fantasy contributor because DeAndre Hopkins is still there. Marquise Hollywood Brown is still there. There are target gobblers ahead of him, in addition to like James Conner, who I think is a real value this year as well. So I'm not on a Trey McBride train. Say that 3 times fast. A Trey McBride train for 2023. But I think there are places and the right spots to draft him. I'm just not going out of my way.
I am renaming several of my dynasty teams Target Gobblers now. I think that is a fantastic dynasty team name. Thank you so much, Bradley Stadler, for that. All right, let's get into the Chicago Bears, about 3 hours south of where I'm at here in Northeast Wisconsin. DJ Moore comes aboard from Carolina. How concerning is his acquisition by the Bears when you look at Cole Kmet's potential target share going forward in 2023?
It's real concerning. I think that's the main takeaway is Cole Kmet last year had some really nice spike weeks, but we also have to keep in mind that was without a DJ Moore in place. That was with Darnell Mooney dealing with injuries. That was with Equanimous St. Brown running a lot of routes. They're just the Bears' offensive weapons were not very good, and so Justin Fields had to lean pretty heavily on Cole Kmet, and I think Kmet should fall to more of like a back end to mid tight end too, like in the Trey McBride area, not in the tight end 12, tight end 13, where I've seen him a lot, tight end 14 maybe. I think his target share takes a dip. I think his end zone, red zone work takes a dip. And even if Justin Fields does take a step forward as a passer, it's probably going to most affect DJ Moore. And we talk about target gobblers in the previous question, but Darnell Mooney and DJ Moore, both 25% target shares or higher each of the last few years. So that's going to really impact Cole Kmet moving forward.
Quick would you rather with Cole Kmet, who's going as tight end 15 at the 10-12 in FFPC best ball tournament, in the FFPC best ball tournament right now. Would you rather have Dalton Schultz or Cole Kmet?
Schultz.
Cole Kmet or Greg Dulcich?
I'll take a shot on Dulcich.
Cole Kmet or Tyler Higbee?
Higbee.
Cole Kmet or Juwan Johnson?
If you would have asked me a week ago, I would have said Juwan Johnson. But the Foster Moreau thing does throw a wrinkle in there. So I think that there's the inflection point, Eric.
Okay. Last one. Cole, I think I know where you're going, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Cole Kmet or Irv Smith in Cincinnati?
I still think I would go with Cole Kmet over Irv Smith here.
Yeah. And I think you're pretty much on par with what the FFPC drafters are doing right now. The only difference is they have Kmet over Higbee, where you have Higbee over Kmet, right?
Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
like Higbee's spike week potential, especially connected to Stafford better.
Back to the Packers. God bless us. It always
This
ends
is
up in Green
sports
Bay.
or not? No, I'm kidding here.
I have asked so many people this, so many pundits in the industry, and I'll ask you too, Bradley. How do you handle Luke Musgrave? How do you handle Tucker Kraft in both dynasty rookie leagues as well as redraft leagues, knowing that Musgrave was selected by the Packers in the second round, then they traded up for Jaden Reed, and then they selected Tucker Kraft in the third round? Your thoughts on these players in the Green Bay offense?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to differentiate them, so I'm going to take the cheaper one and take Tucker Kraft. Kraft is going much later in the drafts because of the draft capital, the second and third round. But Tucker Kraft was a useful receiver, when he was in college. And so it's not like Musgrave was bad either. But I think if we're picking between both of them, and it's hard to differentiate, they're both athletic tight ends. Like Tucker Kraft, 6'5", 254, ran a 4.69 40. That was 73rd percentile, compared to Luke Musgrave, 6'6", 253, 4.61, 88th percentile speed, 40-yard dash. These are very athletic tight ends who are capable of both catching passes. And if you have ambiguity behind Christian Watson and probably Jaden Reed and maybe even Romeo Doubs, like Musgrave and Tucker Kraft can carve out roles that are significant here. And the draft capital indicates that they're both going to be very like a late round, last round type of plays. So I'm in on just sprinkling in, and especially in Dynasty, I'm drafting a lot of Tucker Kraft. Some places he's going undrafted, and I just pick him up off of waivers after the draft happens. I drop some useless tight ends and whatnot. I like picking up Tucker Kraft at his value.
If we have time, I want to get back to the Packers, but for now, I want to try to, just so it's not just a selfish thing between you and me talking Packers football, I want to encompass everybody here. When drafting tight ends in the FFPC format, which is a tight end premium format, 1.5 points per catches in the tight end premium FFPC format, how much does quarterback and tight end stacking figure for you when drafting best ball teams, Bradley?
I think quarterback and tight end is a differentiator, frankly, because you're looking at onesie position. And if you get a stack, all you need is, we see tight ends get touchdowns all the time. And we know that, especially for starting tight ends, their touchdown rates are typically higher than other receiving options, unless you have like a Justin Jefferson or a Christian Watson. You have these big play receivers. Typically, your tight ends are going to be, we talk about touchdown dependent. Well, yeah, that's what they depend on for their fantasy points. So if you're saying, for instance, I'm going to draft Daniel Jones, and that's reason for Daniel Jones to throw a touchdown to Darren Waller. You need to be considering those, and that might be the differentiator. You might have Daniel Jones and Darren Waller, and it's that connection in the onesie position that's going to differentiate you. We talked at the beginning of the radio hour about how do you differentiate yourself from another team. And, maybe instead of taking Mark Andrews, with the stack of Lamar Jackson, maybe you take Isaiah Likely. Consider like that pivot of a stack, or you're taking a really late Peyton Hendershot or something like that.
Or Tucker Kraft.
Tucker Kraft, right? If you have a Jordan Love, just considering those late tight ends that if you get the quarterback right, you might also get the tight end right, and they're correlated. So you have, instead of a parlay, it's like combined almost, so there's less to need to get right if you get a touchdown in especially those tournaments. So that's why like Kelsey Mahomes is so pricey, because they're onesie positions and they're arguably the best at both of their spots. So that's going to be really coveted. And if you have Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, you're going to have to find ways to differentiate yourself from other Mahomes-Kelce stacks, because that's going to be highly sought. Same thing with Burrow and Chase.
Okay, let me ask you about Josh Allen.
Sure.
Dalton Kincaid, tight end 7 at the 603, or you could get Dawson Knox, tight end 22 at the 1404.
I mean, the arbitrage is Dawson Knox.
Okay.
Right. I want to believe the narrative that these tight ends will stick into the slot. And in best ball, like, you can probably draft Kincaid more often, but the hype has gotten too much. At least at this point, Yeah, the first round tight ends are hard bets to make good on, even if you're just saying, oh, he's going to run out and be a receiver. That's tough for me to believe initially, and maybe we treat him as a wide receiver. Like if you're treating him that way, just like we talked about first round wide receivers at the beginning of the pod, same thing with the Dalton Kincaid scenario. But I don't mind throwing Dawson Knox now that his price has significantly dropped as a red zone threat and a stacking option late for Josh Allen.
What's the stronger stack for you right now? Trevor Lawrence, Evan Engram, Deshaun Watson, David Njoku.
I like the. My initial reaction is Watson and Njoku because I like Njoku as a player better. I also think that the target competition is not going to be as strong with Njoku versus Engram, who now gets. We talked about Calvin Ridley at the beginning, so. I think Calvin Ridley is going to command 25% target share or thereabouts. That's going to eat into Evan Engram, who does get a lot of targets. So I think Njoku and Watson, and a bounce back year for Watson is on the horizon. But at the same time, there's a lot of love for Evan Engram given what he did week 17 this past year.
All right. So this is the other thing, and I've never pitched this to anybody before, or not because you're pitching it to our listeners, but I shouldn't say I've done it before one time, but you can book Bradley Stadler on like a video call, right? A Google Meet or a Zoom or whatever. What is the best way for people to do that, Bradley? And how do they do it? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so I'm open for business. You need dynasty help, you want to hop on a 1-minute call, you can use the Did It app and you can find me, and we can go on there. You can go to bestballfantasy.com and you can get the link there on iOS, or you can go to the Did It app and look for me as well in fantasy football. You can also go to bestballfantasy.com and book me for 30-minute sessions or hour sessions, and we can go longer than that if you need, but you can request fantasy advice from me using the website.
All right, so at Best Ball Fantasy on Twitter and bestballfantasy.com. The last thing I want to bring up here, and I don't want to get this wrong. So to consume more Bradley Stadler content, the best way, Tuesday nights, 8:00 Eastern, on the Player Profiler Roto Underworld YouTube channel, right?
Yep, absolutely. That's going to be a main staple moving forward throughout the whole summer. Going to do live drafts, bring on best ball experts, aside from myself, and then we'll rock it out, get you even better at best ball this off season.
I love it. You follow Bradley on Twitter at FF Stadler, at Best Ball Fantasy. Check him out at Roto Underworld, at Fantasy Data NFL, at Top Prop Fantasy, at Full Time Fantasy, at FSWA. I think I covered it all, right?
I think we got it, Eric. Thanks.
You're the man. Thank you, Bradley. Ladies and gentlemen, that does it for our show this evening. Want to remind you, too, to not only I want to shout out to Bradley Stadler and our producer, Anthony Rivera. We're back at 7/6 Central. Next Thursday night, we're going to have Dynasty League Football's Ryan McDowell chopping it up for 2 hours with me. MyFFPC.com is your location to win $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship, $1 million in the FFPC main event. And of course, check out all the Dynasty startups that are going off from $100 to $5,000 there. Best ball tournaments galore. Dynasty Nerds with Garrett Price is up next. Thanks for watching, everybody.